I am Kara Mueller, the Career and College Coordinator for St. Louis Park High School. And at any time you guys have any questions beyond tonight, please reach out to me. We have the Career and College website on the school district website. So if you go to the high school under students or parents, you can see Career and College Center, and you click on that. There's a lot of information and my contact information as well. And tonight, I'm happy to introduce Katie's returning to us, Mrs. Bouts, I apologize. She's our Assistant Director of Admissions and Financial Aid from St. Catherine's University. And she's going to take the next hour to educate you and answer questions about the financial aid process. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you guys, thank you. Good evening. I am the Associate Director of Admission and Financial Aid over there. I do all of the financial aid for all of our new students, so that would be all of our new first-year students and our new transfer students. Have been in the financial aid realm for at least 6 years now, and I'm sure as most of you have heard, there are some changes to the FAFSA this year. It's available earlier, so we're doing this FAFSA night a little bit earlier than usual, and we'll cover all that tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about financial aid and like the history of determining financial aid just briefly. Then we're going to go through an overview of the FAFSA and kind of look at some screenshots of the FAFSA so you can kind of get a feel for that. And then we'll talk about different types of financial aid, what makes up a financial aid award package, and then just some other caveats, special circumstances, if you need to appeal for additional financial aid, if something unusual happens, loss of employment, we'll go over those kind of things as well. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end, and I can certainly answer hopefully most, if not all of your questions tonight. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So this is a slide that I start out with at a lot of the presentations that I do for St. Kate's, and it's really just to remind everyone that much like it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to put a child through college, right? So it's really not just, the burden is not just on the family, the burden's not just on the institution the school is going to, and the burden is not just on the state or federal government. It's really a collaborative partnership between all three entities working together to put the student through college. So on the government side of things, there's federal and state grants available, student loans available, no interest and low interest loans available. On the university side, there's usually merit scholarships involved, personalized financial aid awards, sustained financial aid, meaning they'll renew your financial aid every year that you come back. And then the student and family's contribution would be completing the FAFSA, applying for outside scholarships, and also perhaps making a contribution out of savings or payment plan. So it's really everyone working together to put a student through college. The goal of financial aid, of course, is to help your student get through college and assist families in paying for college. And we achieve that by pretty much equally evaluating each family's ability to pay. So we're not looking at your willingness to pay, unfortunately. In that case, no one would be willing, right? We are looking at your ability to pay. So in order to do that, we try to level the playing field by having everyone fill out the same application, which would be the FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. And we're trying to, we're working with a limited amount of resources here and trying to distribute those as best we can and as equitably as we can. So FAFSA.gov is where you will go to fill out the FAFSA. I'm not sure if it's still up, but there used to be a FAFSA.com out there that would charge you to do the FAFSA. And it does stand for the free application for federal student aid, so do not pay to fill out your FAFSA. When you get to the FAFSA website, it's helpful to have these tax documents with you, or you can make use of something called the IRS data transfer, which will do it automatically for you from your taxes, and we'll get to more about that a little bit later here. And then, as I said before a little bit earlier, the FAFSA is available earlier. You used to have to wait until January 1st of your child's senior year to be able to fill it out. It's now, for the first time, available much earlier. It's now available as of October 1st. Has anybody here today already filled out the FAFSA? A couple people? Good. Way to go. High achievers, I like it. So that's great. You can fill it out sooner, and hopefully you'll get your financial aid award sooner. So I know here at St. Kate's, we're working really hard to be able to send out our awards in December, when normally we wouldn't be able to send those out till March. So it'll mean, more time for you and your family to really compare financial aid awards and be able to make a good financial decision when it comes to college. So as I just talked about, new this year, early FAFSA, now available October 1st of the student's senior year of high school. The other change, because it's earlier this year, they're going to be using something called prior year income. And that sounds really confusing. What the heck is that? And what that means is that they're going to be using tax year data that's 2 years old by the time the student is entering school. So your students are going to be entering, for the parents of seniors in the room, your students will be entering in fall of 2017, September of 2017. But the FAFSA is going to be asking about tax year data from 2015. So that's where the prior comes in, because it's 2 years old at this point, whereas used to just be 1 year old and just prior year income. But the bonus about this is that in the old days, when FAFSA was available January 1st, the 2016 tax year would have just ended, and you'd probably have to go in there with estimates and then go back later after you've filed your taxes and update it. You won't have to do that this year, because you're going to be using tax information that has already been filed months ago, and so you should be able to fill it out completely the first go around and not have to go back in there and update anything. So that's a little bit of a bonus here. So like I said, you're going to be using tax returns for the taxes that you just filed this past April 2016. And the extension deadline is October 2016. So even if you had an extension, there's probably a really good chance you've already filed your 2015 taxes. So this is still semi-new. So this is the second year that FAFSA has used something called the FSA User ID. FSA stands for Federal Student Aid, and this replaces the PIN number. So for you who remember doing a FAFSA when you were going to college, you remember having a 4-digit PIN number which you use to electronically sign your FAFSA or get into your loan documents. So that has gone away, and they instead will have you create a username and password associated with the federal aid websites. The parent needs to create one, and the student needs to create one. You should not use the same email address when you're creating them. Everybody needs to have their own email address account associated with their own ID. And this is what you will use to electronically sign the FAFSA and sign off that it's your information and that it's valid and all that. So this is going to be actually the first thing you do when you go to fill out the FAFSA. It's going to prompt you to create an FSA user ID. And you'll pick a username and password, pick some security questions, that kind of thing. So that will be the first step, and then you'll get into the FAFSA application. Once you're into the FAFSA, it's first going to ask you all about the student. So things like the student's name, social security number, date of birth. It always helps to enter the student's name exactly how it appears on their social security card, because they do process everything through and run a check against the Social Security Administration to make sure things match up. So no nicknames on the FAFSA. You do need to renew your FAFSA every year. It is an annual process, so it's not a one and done type thing. You do need to do your FAFSA every single year to have your financial aid renewed. Make sure you complete the correct aid year. Especially now with the FAFSA being out earlier, there's going to be 2 active FAFSAs out there. There's going to be the 16-17 one for current students and the 17-18 one for future students. So for our high school seniors in the room, make sure you do that 17-18 FAFSA. So once you answer the student demographic information, it's going to present you with what we kind of call dependency questions. And what the FAFSA is doing here is trying to determine if your student is what, for financial aid purposes, is called a dependent student or an independent student. Typically, students who are under the age of 24 will be considered dependent for financial aid purposes, and you will need to provide the parents' information. If you're wondering what would make a student independent for financial aid purposes, these are all the different instances where a student would be considered independent. So if they were married, legally married, if they had a child of their own who they support, graduate or professional student, veteran of the armed services. So as you can see, nowhere up there does it say file their taxes on their own. So even if your child, after their first year of college goes out and gets their own job, you're no longer claiming them as a dependent on your tax return. For financial aid, that doesn't count. That does not make them independent. It would need to mean that they're self-supporting and they meet one of these criteria for being an independent student. So the vast majority of students, especially high school seniors going into college for the first time, will be dependent, and you will provide parent information on the FAFSA. So once your dependency status is determined, it will ask you student income and asset information. It will ask the student's information first, and parents will be asked second. Right here, the red arrow is pointing to something called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool. And this is a tool that's been in place for a couple of years now, where you can actually go in and verify your information. And if you have filed your taxes, which most people have at this point, the FAFSA can automatically transfer your tax data onto your FAFSA, and it can save you a lot of time in punching in numbers. So you would click on that and it will take you out. I'll show some screenshots of that later, but I'll say this multiple times, but it's highly recommended that you use this just so it's the most accurate, and there's some benefits to it as well that I'll talk about in a moment. So here we are with parent information. Again, dependent students must provide parent information on the FAFSA. If for whatever reason the student doesn't have contact with their parent, some kind of special circumstance going on, you're encouraged to talk to your college that you're applying to and see how you'd want to proceed with that. Every college kind of has a different process for that, so it's good to get in touch with them to see exactly what kind of information they would need. So which parent goes on the FAFSA? If a student's biological parents are divorced, you want to include the information for the custodial parent, so the parent who has more custody than the other, also defined as the parent who the student lives with more than 50% of the year. So if joint custody, include information for the parent who the child lived with in the past 12 months. If it's back and forth, it would be whoever has it more than 50%. Yes. Her question says the state of Minnesota grants 50-50, and if that's the case, and it is right down the middle, that the child lives 6 months of the year with one parent and 6 months with the other, then it would be the parent who provides the most financial support, AKA the parent that makes the higher wages, higher salary. That would be the custodial parent. Yep, so her question is about remarriage, and that's the second bullet that I have listed here. So if the custodial parent is remarried, both the parent and the step-parent information is required to be reported on the FAFSA. So when you're filling out the FAFSA, it's going to ask for the parent marital status. The first selection is married or remarried. So if the custodial parent, let's say the student's biological parents are separated, and we've determined that the mom is the custodial parent because she supports the students for more than 6 months of the year. The student lives with her the majority of the year. And if that mom is remarried, then stepdad also needs to be reported on the FAFSA since they are legally married. So the question is it one parent or the other? It's not both parents. And the answer is it will depend on the marital status. So if the parents are divorced or separated, then yes, it would only be one parent plus the step-parent if applicable. It would only be both parents if the parents are in fact married and still married and live in the same household. So the question is, why would you choose the higher than the lower? And that's how it's not we, the schools, that are saying that. It is FAFSA, it is the federal guidelines, and it would be because if that parent is earning more money, then it can be assumed that that parent is providing more financial support. It really comes down to to determine who is providing the majority of financial support to the student. So the question is, what if the parent is unwilling to provide or unwilling to do the FAFSA? So, like I said at the beginning, the FAFSA is based all about on your ability to pay, not the willingness to pay. So if a parent was not willing to do the FAFSA, they would actually require that the parent write a letter saying, I'm not willing to do the FAFSA and not provide my information. And that would allow us to give the student loans only. So we'd be able to give them the unsubsidized direct loan that students are eligible for if they don't demonstrate financial need. The question is, who's responsible for the federal loans that are offered through doing the FAFSA? And the answer is the student. It is a student loan. Everything is completed by the student. The student fills out a promissory note, a promise to pay that they will be responsible for repayment. There's no cosigner for the loan, so if the student defaults on the loan, that wrecks the student's credit history. It does not affect the parent in any way. There is something out there called a Parent Plus loan, which that would have the parent involved. The parent would have to apply for that, and then the parent is on the hook for repayment and everything that goes with that. But the federal student loans that are offered automatically through the FAFSA are offered to the student, and then it's the student's choice on whether they want to accept those loans or not. So the question is, why are the parents responsible to begin with, and what kind of goes into the aid calculation? And I do have a few more slides about this a little bit later. But just historically, the federal student aid process has always been about the parents' ability to pay, and it's been just kind of socially accepted, you know, for the last 40 years, where higher education funding has gone through Congress, that it's the parents' responsibility to help the student through college. I don't see that changing anytime soon. And certainly it's becoming more and more where parents will say, you know, I'll fill out the FAFSA for you, but after that you're on your own. And then we can work with the student about what else they can do to help fill the gap. But it is, you know, the FAFSA is the best tool that we have to administer financial aid, to judge each family's ability to pay on some sort of equal playing field. We ask the same questions for everyone: income, assets, family size, how many are in college, and it's the best tool that we have in order to equitably award financial aid to students. So the last bullet here on the slide that I'll cover, for parents who biological parents of students who are not married but are living together, that is an option on the FAFSA. So maybe you're not legally married, but you all live together as a family in the same household. You will select this option on the FAFSA, unmarried and living together. And then for the tax returns, you actually won't be able to do that IRS data transfer, but you will have to kind of do some math on your own and combine your two tax returns together, since you're not married, filing jointly, and you don't have one single tax return to work with. So household size is another thing that's on the FAFSA that can kind of sometimes be a little tricky. And this, again, like I said, is one of the factors in determining financial aid: how many people are in your house and how many people are the parents supporting. So the household size is the number of people parents provide more than 50% of financial support to for the upcoming school year for 17-18. Just as a reminder, the prior really only applies to income. It does not apply to the other questions on the FAFSA, like household size. So it's going to ask you, how many people will you be supporting during the school year 17-18, and how many of those people will be enrolled in college? So that's the second bullet, the number in college. Per federal regulations, parents are not counted in the number in college. So if somebody's going to school part-time or full-time to get whatever kind of degree, Federal Department of Ed has decided to not include parents in the number in college. So the question is about other dependents or other children that you also have 50-50. Yeah. So you're going to kind of use the same logic. You know, if it's who are they living with more than, you know? Yes, so if you have multiple children from, the same two biological parents, whoever you deem as the custodial parent, the parent that makes more money, they're going to be the custodial parent for all those children. So the biological parent who makes more money, and if that person is remarried, the step parent needs to be on the FAFSA. So it's number of people. There isn't any age cutoff. So if you have a grandparent who lives in your household, or an aunt or uncle who's not contributing to that household, they're not out there working and helping to financially support the family, then they would be considered a dependent of that household. So again, I said it before, and I'll repeat it again. Definitely make use of this data retrieval tool on the FAFSA. Like I said, the majority of families will be able to use this because their 2015 taxes were good and filed. It saves you time. It's the most accurate way to report your income on the FAFSA. You'll also be less likely to be selected for verification process and have to submit extra documents to your school. So I'll get into it a little bit later too, but the verification process is where we have to make sure that all of your income information on the FAFSA was in fact correct. And if you've done this data retrieval, we feel a little bit better about it, or at least the Department of Education feels a little bit better about it because your income has come directly from the IRS and hasn't been changed. So there are a few people who unfortunately cannot make use of the IRS data retrieval, and that would be any married couples who file separate tax returns. So if you file married filing separately instead of married filing jointly, that's not available to you since that would be 2 tax returns rather than 1. If the student's legal parents are unmarried and living together, so I mentioned this before, they might both file as single, so it can't add the 2 tax returns together, so that would be another situation. And then if you have filed an amended tax return, the 1040X form, meaning you made changes to your taxes, or if you file a foreign tax return, or if you were a victim of IRS identity theft or fraud, the IRS data retrieval is not available to you. This is really not a huge percentage of families though, so you should be able to use that IRS data retrieval tool, and I would highly recommend that you use it. So again, make use of the data retrieval. When you click on it, you are going to actually leave the FAFSA website. So you can see here, leaving FAFSA on the web, and it's going to take you to actually an IRS website. You're going to want to confirm your federal income tax information. This will obviously make sure they're pulling the correct tax return information. Verify your date of birth, social security number, all of that good stuff, the address you used on your most recent tax return, and hit submit. Definitely hit submit. We have people who go through and think they've done it, and they haven't. So again, here's a screenshot of what it will look like when you're verifying your information, so they can get your tax information from the IRS. And then you kind of have the Presto line here. So you get to see, yes, transferred from the IRS. So that is what you want to see next to the question, what was your adjusted gross income for the year? What was your taxes paid? If it successfully came over, it will say transferred from the IRS right there on it. So it's actually quite a few lines from your tax return that's able to get transferred over. There are a few lines that come from your W-2 form if you do receive a W-2 form. And if that's the case, there is, a help bar on the side of the FAFSA that will always tell you where to look on the W-2 form, or if you're not using the data retrieval, it has which line to look at on your tax return, and that can help you figure out what piece of income they might be asking about. So just be aware, not all of the information from your tax return, well, we take as much information from the tax return as we can, but some of it does come from your W-2 form as well. So have that available too when you are filling out the FAFSA. So we've got some more information here about other income information, so stuff that is not on the tax return per se. The first one being child support. So it's either it can either be total child support paid in that calendar or total child support received in that calendar year. Other things like taxable combat pay, and then gift money received, they kind of do a catch-all umbrella of other untaxed income on the FAFSA. It doesn't specifically lay this out on the FAFSA, so I just kind of like to tell people if you do receive, assistance like Social Security income, SNAP assistance, any kind of, assistance programs like that, you do not need to report those on the FAFSA. The FAFSA is really asking for earned income, taxable income, certain forms of untaxed income like child support and gift money received. But those benefit programs like Social Security, food stamps are not asked for it in dollar amounts on the FAFSA. Parent asset information. So there's only 3 questions for parent assets that they ask. The first one is cash, checking, and savings. So they really just want a snapshot of what your current checking and savings account balances are, so you'll go ahead and put that in there. The next question is the net value of your investments. So that would be value minus any debt that you have. We'll start with the things that you should not include in this number, because people tend to include them, but they don't need to. If you own a home, the value of your family home should not be included. A farm that the family lives on should not be included. A family-owned business with fewer than 100 employees. So if you're a small business owner and it asks you for the value of your business, unless you have more than 100 employees, you should be putting a 0 in there. And then do not include the value of your retirement or pension plans in a qualified retirement account. So they recognize that that's set aside for retirement, and we're not going to include that as far as federal aid calculations go. So those are the things you should not include in the parent asset portion of the FAFSA. What you do want to include, if you have any rental properties, so if you have other real estate, or any investment farms, investments, college savings plans like 529 plans, those will get included, and this is where you would report those on the FAFSA. With the 529 plans, you will want to report it here as a parent asset, whether it's in the parent's name or the student's name. The student asset is weighed pretty heavily, and they don't want to knock students who made a 529 plan and did save for college, and so we're giving you the chance to report it as a parent asset rather than as a student asset, so that's going to be more beneficial for you. FAFSA school information, so this is a very important step here. You want to enter in the colleges that you would like the FAFSA sent to. The FAFSA will allow you to do 10 schools at one time, so if you are applying to more than 10 schools, you can go ahead and fill it out with your first 10, hit submit, have both the parent and student sign it, and then I usually tell students to wait 3 or 5 days so that FAFSA can process, everything can go through. If you want to call a few of those schools and just verify that they did in fact receive your FAFSA, check it out, that would be good. And then you can log back into your FAFSA on the web and log back in with your username and password, and then delete a school that you have verified has already gotten your FAFSA and put in your extra schools. There's 2 ways that you can add schools. You can either, if you know the student's school code, and pretty much every school will put that in big bold letters right on their financial aid websites. So if you know the school codes, you can enter those right in and hit submit. Otherwise, you can search by state, city, and school name and find the school that way. When you do this step, the school will usually ask what your housing choice is. And housing choice does make a difference on how much financial aid you receive because the cost of attendance will be different. So make sure you select the housing choice that you intend to have at each campus when you're doing this step. And then we're to the signature page. So this is the end of the FAFSA. We want to make sure that the FAFSA is signed by both the parent and the student. And if you do go back and make any corrections to your FAFSA, hopefully you won't have to because you'll do that IRS data transfer. If you do have to go back and make corrections, hopefully it's just to add schools or delete schools. But if you do go make changes, it does need to be signed by both the student and the parent again. So not just one party can be making changes on their own. And again, we do this signature with the FSA ID username and password. There is a printed signature page, so if that FSA ID is really giving you trouble, you can print out a physical page and sign it, and then send it to the school. It does delay processing quite a bit if you do that, but that is a kind of a worst case scenario option for you. And then once you have submitted your FAFSA, you'll get a page that looks like this. We want to point out two things on this page for you. The lower one here, expected family contribution, EFC. That's what EFC stands for. You'll receive your EFC, which is, the number that we use to determine financial aid amounts. And then something else that's up there, which you shouldn't have to use if you were able to successfully send your information to the schools. But a data release number is also at the top. So if for some reason a school did not receive your FAFSA, you can give that school your data release number, DRN, 4-digit code up here, and they'll be able to access your FAFSA that way. So FAFSA results, you'll get an email notification with a link to the student's student aid report, which is pretty much the receipt from your FAFSA showing all the information that you input into the FAFSA, and it will have your EFC on there, expected family contribution. And again, you can return to your FAFSA if you need to make corrections or add school codes throughout the year. So verification, I mentioned this briefly before. This is a process where the Department of Education will randomly select FAFSAs that they want to verify and make sure that the information reported on them is in fact correct. So roughly 1 out of 3 FAFSAs will be selected for verification. And in this scenario, student and parents will need to provide official tax information to the school of which they're attending if they are selected. Unless you did the IRS data transfer, then we don't need to collect the tax documentation because that IRS transfer is good to go. But we might have you fill out some extra verification worksheets. For example, household size, if we need to verify that, we'll have you fill out a worksheet that just verifies how many people are in your household. Some students might receive a request to provide citizenship documentation, and that's kind of common. Students will go through their FAFSA will go through the process, and they'll just want us to do a double check on their citizenship. And if that's the case, you would just bring the original copy of either the U.S. passport, the certificate of naturalization, or the student's U.S. birth certificate to the financial aid office, and then we can keep a copy for our records. Unfortunately, they no longer allow you to mail us photocopies or fax us photocopies. We do need to see the original. So once you know which school they're going to and if this is requested, you'll want to provide this to the school directly. So special circumstances, so this is kind of what we were talking about earlier. If the parents have a loss in income or a loss of employment, maybe the parents separate in between, the prior year income and the current year we're actually in. So if this happens to you, get in touch with the financial aid office at the school that your child will be attending. They will likely have a form for you to fill out. I know my office has a form for you to fill out. These are pretty common. We get a few of these every year. So usually they have a specific form for you to fill out and things for you to document. So whether it's change in income, other things that we can consider on special circumstance would be unusual out-of-pocket medical expenses. So if somebody had an emergency surgery or just medical expenses that year were unusually high, that can be something we can take into account and could potentially affect how much aid you qualify for. One-time income, so maybe something happened, you sold your home that year, you sold your business, so your tax return income looks super duper high when in fact it's not because you had that sale of income. And then elementary or secondary school tuition paid. This is not an option at all schools. but certain schools will take into account the fact if you're paying for private elementary or secondary tuition. So there are other special circumstances that other schools might take into account as well, but these are the most common. And what we'll usually do if something like this occurs, I'll use the example of change in income, like if a parent loses their job, obviously the 2015 tax return is not a good reflection of that. So we'll probably ask you for your most recent pay stub, or maybe we'll ask you for a more recent tax return, and we can kind of estimate, you know, what the income is or what it was up to that certain date, and do a recalculation of financial aid to see what more you might qualify for. So I mentioned the EFC, expected family contribution. These next couple of slides we're going to kind of break down, you know, how schools determine financial aid. It pretty much comes down to a simple math equation. It's the cost of attendance for the school that you're applying to minus your expected family contribution. That equals how much financial aid you are eligible for, your eligibility for need-based financial aid. So we'll illustrate on the next slide, the cost of attendance can be different for each school, but a student's EFC will stay the same at all of them. And again, just reiterating what goes into the EFC, what goes into the financial aid calculation, all the things we've talked about today: parent income, student income, family size, number of students in the household attending college, family assets, and also any untaxed income. And then this was this comparison chart I was talking about. You can see, let's say a four-year public school, let's say their total cost of attendance is $24,000 versus a two-year public school of $12,000. This family's EFC of $5,000, it's the same at both schools, same FAFSA was sent to both schools, but you can see a student would be eligible for more financial aid at a four-year institution than a two-year institution because the cost is higher. So you have eligibility for more financial aid. Same thing with a private four-year school that has a sticker price of closer to $40,000 or maybe even $50,000. Your EFC of $5,000 still stays the same, but you have even higher financial need or financial aid eligibility because of the higher cost of that institution. So that's why it would make more sense for someone who's applying to, let's say, St. Cloud State to maybe not receive as much financial aid at St. Cloud State than they would if they were applying to St. Catherine University, since we're a bit pricier than St. Cloud, but we're going to give out more financial aid because you have a higher financial aid eligibility with that higher sticker price. One thing, too, to keep in mind when you're comparing colleges and college financial aid awards, make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Cost of attendance will include pretty much every kind of educational expense you can think of. So it'll include things that won't necessarily be on your bill. So for instance, they include an allowance for transportation, getting to and from campus. They include an allowance for miscellaneous expenses, things like shampoo. Direct costs are really just going to be what shows up on your bill. So when you're comparing financial aid awards, do you want to think about comparing them with everything included, books and supplies, miscellaneous expenses, or do you just want to know, what do I owe the college? What is my bill going to be? And if that's the case, make sure you do your comparisons in this way, that you're comparing apples to apples and that you're not, mixing and matching and comparing one school's cost of attendance with another school's direct costs. So just something good to keep in mind when it comes time to compare your financial aid awards. So we'll get into the types of financial aid here a little bit, winding down here. So federal grants, gift aid does not need to be repaid. Pell Grant, this is the most well-known federal grant, ranges between $598 and $58.15 this past year. You do have to have a certain EFC to qualify for the Pell Grant. So if you have an EFC of less than 5234, you will qualify for some amount of Pell Grant. Federal SEOG grant, the amount will vary. It's kind of up to the campus you're applying to. It's something called campus-based funding, so they kind of award it how they see fit. So that amount can vary. But it typically goes to students with low EFCs and Pell Grant recipients. Teach grant, so this is kind of not really a grant, but they call it a grant. So Teach grant is offered to students who are education majors who have indicated they want to be teachers. It's a $4,000 grant per year. It is not need-based, so students can receive it even if they don't demonstrate financial aid eligibility. But there are, a lot of caveats that come with it. You do need to meet certain requirements and teach in certain districts for a certain amount of time for it to stay a grant. If you do not meet those requirements, it will become an unsubsidized loan, and the interest that has accrued on it since the time you took it goes backdated and gets added on. So there's tons of paperwork and things that you fill out when you take the Teach grant to make sure that you understand all of this, but it's good just to know up front what you're getting into, that it's kind of the Teach grant loan. State grants are available, especially if you're a Minnesota resident going to a school in Minnesota. You'll be eligible for the Minnesota State Grant. You can see the range there. Higher income ranges than the Pell Grant, but still relatively low income families will receive this. You do need the FAFSA to be eligible for this. Minnesota Indian Scholarship, FAFSA and program application, Child Care Grant, and Minnesota GI Bill. So you'll be eligible for all of these by filling out the FAFSA, but also it requires some additional application materials on the Minnesota Office of Higher Education website. Minnesota DREAM Act, so these are for Minnesota residents who attended Minnesota high schools who may not have citizenship status yet. So qualifying undocumented students will be eligible for in-state tuition rates at MnSCU and U of M schools. They're also eligible for state financial aid programs like Minnesota State Grant, Minnesota Child Care Grant. And then MnSCU schools and the U of M also have private scholarships available to these students as well. Requirements is that you do need to have attended a Minnesota high school for at least 3 years and have graduated from a Minnesota high school. And then comply with selective service requirements and also apply for federal lawful immigration status should there be a federal process in place. Right now, no such process exists, so that requirement is kind of not required at this point since there's not a process in line. But this is good resources for students who don't have the citizenship status required to fill out the FAFSA. So like I just said, these students cannot use the FAFSA. They're not eligible for federal student aid since they don't have the proper U.S. citizenship just yet. So instead of doing the FAFSA, they're going to apply through the Minnesota Office of Higher Education and fill out the DREAM Act on their website. We always encourage students to do a thorough search for outside scholarships. They're typically awarded based on merit and not need, but there are tons of places to find these, tons of websites and scholarship search engines out there. It's always great to check in with your high school guidance office, career office. They usually have some great resources for you. I know St. Kate's in particular, we are constantly getting emails from places letting us know about outside scholarships, so someone in our financial aid office actually keeps a running list of them on our website, along with deadlines and direct links to those scholarships. So it's going to require a little bit of work on your part and your students' part, but they will be worth it. Lots of different opportunities for those outside scholarships that can really add up. So loans, we were talking about these a little bit earlier. Federal direct Stafford loans, these are the loans that are going to be offered to the student, where the student is the borrower. They come in two forms, subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized loans, no interest is charged while the student is in school. So interest will not begin accruing until the student enters repayment, and repayment doesn't begin until 6 months after they have graduated. Unsubsidized loans still have a low interest rate. I think this year it's 3.67. Still has a low interest rate, but interest is going to be accruing while the student is enrolled. Federal Direct Parent Plus loan. So this is if the parent would like to also supplement the student's borrowing and take a loan on their own. The parent is the borrower. The parent is responsible for repayment. And there is a credit check involved with this loan. So unlike the Federal Direct Stafford loans, it's not the free loan from the government. There is a credit check involved for the Parent Plus loan. This one, repayment does begin immediately. You can opt to defer it until after the student graduates if you want, though. And then there are tons of alternative and private student loans out there too. So if the Parent Plus loan doesn't sound good to you, if you don't want to be the main responsible for the repayment of college loans, private student loans are a good option then, because the student can be the borrower and you, the parent, can be a co-signer to help the student secure that loan, but not ultimately be responsible for repayment unless the student should default on it or something like that. I don't know of any private student loans out there that will lend to students without a creditworthy co-signer. Basically, since the 2009 crash, they've really cracked down on that and are looking for students to have a creditworthy co-signer for those loans. Student employment and work study, another great opportunity to make some additional money while you are in school. Flexible hours are offered. Great to have extra spending money, or it can go toward tuition, kind of up to the student that way. It's on campus, so the student doesn't need to commute to their job. You'll want to check with your specific college about their student employment program and see what they have available. St. Kate's, we offer it to students as they come in. We have a priority hiring process where we can let the student kind of rank where they think they might want to work on campus, and we can usually assign them with a job that fits their interests and what they want to do on campus. Typically, students make between $9, $10, $11 an hour, work maybe 10, 15 hours of work, 15 hours a week. So again, not going to make or break you as far as which school you want to attend, but it can be a great way to supplement your paying for college and have extra spending money for those miscellaneous expenses. Where can you get more information? I've got the College Board website up here. They're a great tool. They also have a scholarship search engine on their website. FastWeb Scholarship Search, another good opportunity to look for outside scholarships. Finaid.org, good website if you're just kind of wondering about the generals of financial aid, like what is need analysis, how does all this work? And then the Minnesota Office of Higher Education website, also a good resource as well. So that is going to conclude all that I have prepared for today. So I would love to open it up to questions now and get those answered for you. Yes. Correct. So the question is about special circumstances, and he's wondering if that's not something you put on the FAFSA, but something you address individually with colleges, and that is correct. The FAFSA should be filled out with the information they ask for, and then if you already know 2015 doesn't look at all like 2017 does, you can either start by sending a letter to the specific college you're attending and explain what that is, or give them a call and just let them know what the situation is, and they'll probably direct you to a form that you'd want to fill out and ask you for additional documentation if needed. Yes, in the back there. Good question. So the question is about parents being included in the number of college. If a parent is attending grad school, can that be included, or is that a special circumstance? And I would say that that is a special circumstance. Certain colleges could make the judgment call on whether or not to potentially include the parent in college, or make some kind of adjustment based on how much tuition you are paying for your graduate school and work that in somehow. But that would be addressed as a special circumstance. Because the FAFSA, again, you'll want to fill out the FAFSA with the information as they ask it, so that that is as filled out as accurately as possible. And they have decided to not include parents in the number in college. But there would be schools, and I know I know that we've done it at St. Kate's, depending on the situation, where we've made some kind of exceptions to include parents in college or make some kind of allowance for the amount of money that they're paying toward their own schooling. The question is, is there any way to fill out the FAFSA with 2016 information, or do you have to go to each individual school? And the answer is you'd have to go to each individual school. So again, you'll want to fill out the FAFSA with the information they're asking for. If your 2016 tax information is that different, I would recommend filing your taxes as soon as you possibly can in 2016 and having that document ready to go to send off to colleges so that they can do a special circumstance for you and give you an adjusted award if it does make a difference. So question about when the FAFSA is available, October 1st of the student's senior year. So for this coming school year, 17-18, it's out there and ready. October 1st, 2016 is when it came out. The question is, if you do a gap year, can you still do financial aid? And the answer is yes, you can. If you want to get an idea now of what your financial aid would be after your gap year, you can. But since the FAFSA is done on an annual basis, they're going to ask you to do it again when you do come back and you're ready to enroll. Because if you fill out the FAFSA for 17-18, they can't use that to award financial aid for the 18-19 year. So you can fill it out if you want to get an idea of what you might be eligible for, but it's not going to be used if you do end up taking the gap year. You would have to fill out the newer application when you do come back. Question was about if the student's applying to a private school, could they potentially be eligible for more aid through the FAFSA? And the answer is kind of yes and no. They are going to need to do the FAFSA, but that private school might have its own institutional form for you to fill out, or they might use something that a lot of private schools use called the CSS Profile, and that is through the College Board, and that is a more in-depth application than the FAFSA. So a lot of private schools, for instance, the ones in Minnesota that required, like Carleton and St. Olaf, a lot of the East Coast schools that are private schools, top 50 national schools, will require that CSS profile, and that will allow you, by doing the profile and the FAFSA, because they're going to want both, they're not going to want to give out financial aid without at least collecting the FAFSA, will open up your eligibility for institutional need-based aid from that institution. So definitely good reminder to check with each specific school what they need. I can guarantee you that they need the FAFSA. I can't guarantee you that that's all that they need, because certain schools will have other requirements, like Carleton, like St. Olaf. They will require the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA. So make sure you check with each individual school that's on your list. College scholarship search. So it still does that, but it does a lot of other things too. It's the same company that runs the SAT. They do a lot they're also connected with the AP exams. They do a lot in the higher education realm. The age of the student does not matter when you go to college. So there's something called FERPA, Family Educational Rights Privacy Act, and when a student matriculates at a school, whether they're 17 or 18 or 24, their record, is their own record. We don't technically need to notify parents of certain information like attendance or like grade point averages. So that will come into play. And with these loans too, the age doesn't matter. So you can certainly, as the parent, help counsel him and help, have that family conversation of whether you want to take those or not. But the student could fill out the paperwork to get those loans, even though he's not 18 yet. The question was, if you make changes, do the changes get sent to all the schools? And the answer is yes, unless you delete those schools while you're making that change. So if you've narrowed down which school you're going to and you only want to make changes and have it be sent to that one school, you'll want to delete the other schools that you have posted on that FAFSA. The health savings account would not be considered an asset for the FAFSA purposes. So it would depend on if it's untaxed or taxable. So if it was taxable, it would show up on your tax return and be part of your AGI. So it would be factored in that way. All right. Well, I can stand up here for 5 minutes or so if any other questions arise. And thanks for your attention tonight.
Thank you so much, Katie. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to Katie and or myself, Kara Mueller. And have a great night. Thanks for coming out.